On December 14th, 1995, Crystal Veslanowicz told her boyfriend Chris that she was going to grab some food at a local Circle K near Salt Lake City, Utah. She never returned home. Around 11 p.m., Chris started to worry about his girlfriend. Instead of calling the police, Chris knocks on the neighbor's door and then took a trip to Circle K to look for Crystal. The following morning at 8:40 a.m., nearly 45 miles away from Salt Lake City, a farmer walking near the Provo River found the naked body of a young female. The farmer immediately called the local sheriff.
The morning of December 16th, 1995, I was dispatched about 1 minute to 10 in the morning to a location on the upper Provo River. The report of a deceased person found along the Provo River. In discovering some of the evidence in the area, like wounds to her body, it definitely had appeared that she was murdered in this location. She took quite a beating from the looks of things with granite rock, which is a very rough, pointed, jagged type of stone. We found two different rocks that happened to have what appeared to be body matter, as well as blood on these rocks, and some very large stones that had quite a bit of blood on them that appeared to have been used after she had been down, which had been dropped on her skull.
Along with the bloody rocks, there was also a pair of socks found near the victim. No other evidence was ever discovered at the crime scene, and the victim remained unidentified. The victim had two distinct tattoos, including a heart tattoo on her left breast. Police sketched the tattoos and released the drawings to the media in hopes of being able to identify their Jane Doe. Crystal's boyfriend Chris saw the news and called the police to inform them that he believed the victim was his girlfriend, Tracy. After Chris provided the police the phone number for Tracy's father, he informed the police the victim was not Tracy. It was most likely his stepdaughter, Crystal. The father informed investigators that Crystal had a history of using her stepsister Tracy's identity. Chris immediately came under suspicion. Police believed that Chris deliberately lied about Crystal's identity. What else could he be lying about? Investigators interrogated Chris and spoke to those closest to him. They learned that Crystal was working as a prostitute and was financially supporting Chris, and he did not have a car. These facts made it highly unlikely that Chris committed a murder nearly 45 miles away. He no longer seemed like a viable suspect. With Chris ruled out, police moved on to other leads. Detectives interviewed over 30 people in connection with Crystal's case, including other sex workers who might know something about the night she disappeared. Investigators learned of a local cab driver who had an obsession with Crystal. The cab driver had told several people that if he couldn't have Crystal, then no one could. He was eliminated as a suspect when no evidence could be linked to him. Police also explored the possibility that there may be a link between Crystal's killing and that of another sex worker named Melissa Griggs. Melissa had been murdered just a few weeks before Crystal disappeared. Melissa worked the same North Temple area as Crystal, and they may have crossed paths. After further investigation, police concluded that the two murders were not similar at all. Investigators were once again at a dead end. The use of DNA in criminal cases was still in its early stages. The widely used CODIS, or the Combined DNA Index System, was only a few years old. Since the DNA didn't match any of the suspects at the time, police were out of options. Crystal's case went cold. In 2006, over a decade after Crystal's death, her case was reopened. There was a new technology that could be used to look at the case more closely. They were also able to extract more DNA from Crystal's fingernails. Sheriff Bonner was hopeful that these advances would lead to the killer. But it wasn't until 4 years later that investigators finally had a breakthrough. A microbial vacuum known as the MVAC was starting to gain popularity as a DNA extraction tool.
After a crime is committed, the search for justice can be frustrating and often devastating for victims. In tonight's Insight Report, we explore how a new forensics tool developed and produced right here in Utah is helping investigators crack cases that might have gone unsolved and unpunished. Like a mini carpet cleaner, the MVAC system sucks up DNA evidence from broad, porous surfaces, like this cotton shirt.
A lot of agencies have cases where they've reached a dead end.
We had worked this case for a couple of years with not coming up with a whole lot of good leads. I mean, we had several leads, but that took us from Washington State to South Dakota, but nothing really panned out that great. It wasn't until 2009 when then Detective Wayne Winterton had heard about some new evidence techniques to be checked with Sorensen Forensic. The stones were taken to Sorensen Forensic, and the science and everything that was gathered and collected there, we realized we had some information that we knew then there was a solvable case. One thing led to another, and we was directed to a company by the name of MVAC.
I was watching the local news and seen an article that they had on there of the MVAC. And it was a new way to collect DNA off of different materials at a crime scene. So I contacted Karma at Sorensen Forensics and asked her if she had heard of the MVAC, and she said, well, yes, we have one. And I says, great. Could we MVAC the rocks that we had initially swabbed? And she says, sure, it's whatever you'd like to do. So we sat down and as a team and talked about it, and we thought we'll send the rock down that had the partial DNA profile on it, along with the additional 2 rocks that had never been tested that had been collected from the crime scene in 1995. They went ahead and used the MVAC to do the testing, and they came back with a male DNA profile, a full male DNA profile that matched that of Joseph Michael Simpson. So we were really excited about this because now we had a full DNA profile off of what we considered was one of the murder weapons that had killed Crystal at the scene.
In 1987, he was convicted of second-degree murder in the fatal stabbing of 26-year-old Paul Helminger. Simpson pled guilty and was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. In April of 1995, Simpson was released on parole. 8 months later, Crystal's badly beaten body was discovered. Sheriff Bonner needed to be certain that Simpson was responsible for Crystal's death. When he looked up Simpson's name, he discovered that Simpson had been living in Sarasota County, Florida for the past 14 years. Bonner and a fellow detective flew down to Florida and set up surveillance on Simpson. They followed Simpson until they watched him discard a cigarette butt. The butt was collected and brought to Utah for DNA testing. The match was confirmed. Simpson's trial began on September 15, 2016. The prosecution laid out the DNA evidence for the jury. They also argued that Simpson was familiar with the area where Crystal's body was found. Simpson worked as a shuttle driver at the Salt Lake City airport, and his regular route took him past the area where she was discovered. Simpson had also made statements to other inmates, informing them that he had killed Crystal. The defense insisted that Simpson was not the only suspect, and the jury could not convict him on DNA evidence alone.
After 4 weeks at trial, a 20-year-old murder case came down to DNA and an airport shuttle route. Tonight, we know that evidence was enough as jurors have found Joseph Simpson guilty of aggravated murder in the 1995 death of Crystal Baslanowicz. The teenage prostitute was found dead on the banks of the Provo River in Midway, but the case went cold until 2013 when new technology found Simpson's DNA on her body and on the rocks used as the murder weapon. Simpson will be sentenced tomorrow.
On September 30th, 2016, Joseph Michael Simpson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his life in the Central Utah Correctional Facility. In 2019, Sheriff Todd Bonner retired after 33 years in law enforcement. If not for his determination and pursuit of a vicious killer, Simpson would still be a free man, and Crystal may have never received the justice she deserved.